Hi, my name is Moritz. I'm an animation creator, director and storyteller, and co-founder of Studio Nice. I want to tell you a little bit about the creation process of the VR documentary KUSUNDA, on which I had the pleasure to work on as an art director. Perhaps I should start by saying Sodjak.
It means greetings. My name is Lil Bahadur KUSUNDA. We come from Gulmi district, but this is where I live now.
KUSUNDA is the name of a language isolate, which means it is unrelated to any other language families of the world. KUSUNDA is only spoken in one remote region in Nepal. Like many other languages, as you can see, it faces extinction, since less and less people speak it. KUSUNDA is also the name of former semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers that called themselves the Kings of the Forest. This is where journalists and VR documentarists Gayatri Parameswaren and Felix Gaedtke of Now Here Media come into play. They wanted to shine a light on the topic of vanishing languages and cultures. In the beginning of 2020, they traveled to Nepal to talk to some of the last fluent speakers of KUSUNDA, like protagonists Lil Bahadur KUSUNDA. They shot volumetric video using a little green screen and depth kit. This was quite a challenge in such a remote place. They also did photogrammetry scans of the environments, inside buildings, but also outside using aerial photography. In order to depict scenes that would reflect the past and culture of the KUSUNDA people, the directors chose animation. These scenes were based on the narration of Lil Bahadur, who lived in the jungle for most of his life. Early concepts included point clouds, but due to several artistic and creative reasons, this approach didn't seem viable. My work began by doing studies of the KUSUNDA people and creating concept art. Conceptually, it was pretty clear that the look we were aiming for should be fragmented and scattered to reflect the threat of losing the KUSUNDA language and culture. After doing some tests, we realized that VR painting tools could be a way to achieve this vision. So I tested out quill and tilt brush. Ultimately, we used tilt brush since it allowed us to mix painted and interactive lighting, which matched the other assets of the project. Besides this, the tool works very well with Unity, which we use to set up the whole VR experience. Here you can see a first test of a tilt brush character on which we applied some first motion capture data. The shot was captured outdoors with an Xsense mocap suit, as it was planned to record some of the scenes in a forest. But in the end, the sheer amount of material we had to capture forced us to record all performances in the studio. We looked at a lot of research photographs and studied them to understand what specific features define the KUSUNDA people. Very typical for KUSUNDA men are very long bows for hunting and a woven bag. The women are often dressed in more colorful outfits with scarves and skirts similar to a sarong. I used the freeware tool Make Human and quick overpaints to create simple silhouettes for the most important characters of the KUSUNDA family we were creating. This was an effective way for the creative team to discuss the individual features of each character. I used these rough meshes as a base geometry for not getting lost in the VR environment while painting. Painting in tilt brush is very intuitive and liberating, since you don't have the boundaries of a regular 3D software. But at the same time it's a challenge since it lacks the precision of these regular tools. If you want to exchange assets between different software packages, you need this precision to keep the dimensions of an asset. So the workflow was a bit of a challenge since we didn't have any numeric control over the coordinates of an element. To have a reference coordinate system, I used a workaround. I created a rough grid, which I then matched to the symmetry axis of tilt brush. This way I was able to know where I was painting and when I painted the assets. Unfortunately, it was not possible to append other assets to one file, so I really had to manage what assets were needed in one scene, for example as a reference for color palettes, size references, etc. Maybe there's a way to do all that, but since I'm not the most technical guy, I couldn't figure it out. So if you have any ideas, leave a comment. Other simple blocked meshes were also used as a basis to create the sets. They also served for previous purposes to communicate camera movements, light placement, and also the position of the user in the VR environment. I really like mixing animation techniques, so why not paint fire instead of simulating it? Especially if it feels right for a certain style. I created this fire effect in a way similar to cell animation, by painting individual phases in tilt brush. Placing and timing these strokes in 3D space of Blender and Unity was quite a mess, so perhaps the animation features of Quill would have been a better choice for this task. Sparks and smoke were later added using particle systems in Unity. Planning and communication is always very important, especially if the workflow is complex. The layout sets came in very handy for the whole process of planning the mocap session, since we could only move within the specific spatial boundaries of the capturing stage. The stage was 10 by 10 meters, represented by the layout grid below the 3D dummies. The best capturing results were about 1 meter in from the edge. We created floor plans and blocked out the actions of each character, as precise as possible. For bigger set pieces, we stitched together different performances. Thanks to the support of the ZHDK, the Zurich University of the Arts, we were able to use their immersive art space and mocap stage. We used 2 accent suits for single actor and partner scenes, and OptiTrack for group scenes. While the accent setup was very accurate, we had to fix some of the OptiTrack captures, since the actors were covering too many tracking markers to get a clear result. For some characters we added additional IK controllers to keep their feet on the ground. Using a witness camera was a huge benefit, since it made it a lot easier for us to narrow down the best takes and process only data we'd really need. At the same time we had a live play-out view in VR to immediately evaluate the immersion of the user. And Ollie gets up. Nice, good night. Grandmother gets up. We also recorded a ton of secondary characters to populate a village scene, and ended up with around 45 minutes of character performances. A special thanks to Tobias Baumann, Christine Jungic, Corinne Soland, and many more for their technical support and experience with mocap performances. We used Blender as our main 3D tool to process all assets prior sending them to Unity. In Blender we rigged the characters, cleaned and applied the motion capture data. It was a bit of a challenge to do the weighting of these scattered meshes, but thanks to the reference meshes, we had clean topology that was easy to rig, so we could simply transfer the weights from the base mesh to the tilt brush mesh. Big thanks to technical director Henning Schild for his work on all the motion capture data. Wherever we would set up the whole scene in Blender and then export all necessary files as FBX to Unity.
Fire to the side and sleep next to it.
Usually, we would burn fire on one side and make a pillow and sleep.
Here you can see another scene, which turned out as a challenge, mainly due to the props that were involved. As anyone who works in animation knows, any kind of interaction makes the animation process a lot harder. So, since the actors held and let go props with both hands alternately, we had to use dynamic parenting to attach and detach assets wherever necessary. While this technique is nothing special anymore for animation, it became a bit tricky when exporting the assets to Unity. As the props lost a reference During the baking process, we used an empty object located on the origin of the coordinate system to give them a reference in space. This simple process solved a couple of problems for us. Creating the animated characters and sets was certainly the biggest chunk of work. But since we wanted to let the audience participate in reviving the language, we wanted to incorporate an interactive element to the experience.
You will need to use your voice in this experience.
By speaking a trigger word in the KUSUNDA language, the user moves to the next chapter or can decide between different storylines. These are some of the designs of a sound wave that should visualize an audio input. We went back and forth with several options and ultimately went with a subtle version, as seen here.
After the prompt.
Sojak. I'd like to encourage you to check out Speak to Awaken, which is a series of interactive VR documentaries. Besides KUSUNDA, there's already another episode out called Diving into Siraya, which is centered on a dormant indigenous language in Taiwan. You can find the links to the projects below. I would also like to thank all the funders, partners, and everyone who supported the production. My special thanks go out to Gayatri Parameswaren and Felix Gaedtke for their openness and creative collaboration. Also thanks to Tobias Wehrum for his patience and technical support, and Henning Schild for his commitment. If you liked this video, feel free to like and subscribe.